All right, welcome everyone. Ready for another deep dive? Today we're plunging headfirst into the world of Jewish mysticism. Now, when you hear Jewish mysticism, you might think of, I don't know, secret societies, hidden rituals, dusty old books tucked away in some ancient library.
Yeah, it definitely has that kind of mysterious aura around it.
But, beyond those initial images, what we're really going to explore is something much more universal. It's that deep human desire to connect with something bigger than ourselves, something we might call the divine. It's a yearning that goes beyond just intellectual understanding, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, and that's a really key point. Jewish mysticism acknowledges that there's this whole dimension of reality that our intellect alone can't fully grasp. Our sources really emphasize this idea that it's not just about what we can analyze with our minds.
So there's more to it than just logic and reason.
Exactly. Our sources talk about the need to tap into something they call the cravings of the heart. It's about recognizing the great fact of the soul, that inner world of emotions and intuition that can lead us to a deeper understanding of the divine.
So someone who's more drawn to tangible facts, more comfortable with the purely rational, might find this whole realm a bit challenging to grasp.
Right, because it requires a different way of knowing. It involves embracing the subjective, that personal inner experience that isn't always easy to define or categorize.
Now, digging into our sources, it's clear that early Jewish mystical thought really focused on cosmology and the Hebrew alphabet. It's almost like they were trying to create a map of the universe using letters.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it. We see this in ancient texts like the Enoch literature with its vivid descriptions of the cosmos, and later in Kabbalistic writings, which really delved deep into the creation stories in the Bible. This fascination with cosmology led to some very interesting ideas about the divine and its role in the universe.
And the Hebrew alphabet, it wasn't just a way to write words, it became almost a sacred code, right?
Absolutely. Different combinations and arrangements of letters were believed to hold the keys to understanding both the heavens and the earth. They saw a profound link between the very building blocks of their language and the fundamental structure of reality.
It's mind-boggling to imagine that kind of connection. Now, I know some critics might find these early cosmological ideas a bit out there, maybe a little too imaginative.
Sure, there's always that tendency to focus on the surface level, more literal interpretations. But our source reminds us that there's this preponderating mass of true poetry and spirituality that flows through these traditions. These early attempts, even if they seem strange to us now, were fueled by a deep desire to connect with the divine and to understand humanity's place in the vast scheme of things.
It's that underlying motivation, that search for meaning that's so powerful. It speaks to a fundamental human need that transcends time and culture. And it seems like Jewish mysticism played a really important role in providing a counterbalance within Jewish tradition.
You hit the nail on the head there. It served as a kind of spiritual counterweight, reminding people that there's more to Judaism than just strict adherence to laws and rituals.
Mm.
Jewish mysticism highlights the importance of inner experience, the beauty and power of prayer, and the significance of the afterlife, which shifts the focus beyond just earthly concerns.
It's like it's keeping that inner flame of faith alive, reminding people that there's this whole other dimension to explore. And our source draws an interesting parallel to Christian mysticism and figures like Meister Eckhart, who really emphasized a more simplified, personal relationship with the divine.
That's a great connection. Mystical movements, whether within Judaism or Christianity, often act as a catalyst for new ways of understanding faith, stripping away layers of complexity and dogma to emphasize a more direct, heart-centered experience of the divine.
Okay, so let's dive into some of these early mystical groups that our sources talk about. We often hear about the Essenes as being an early example of Jewish mysticism. What do we actually know about them?
Well, the Essenes are fascinating. They're often credited as representing one of the earliest expressions of conscious Jewish mysticism. Some scholars believe they might have emerged from the pre-Maccabean Hasidim, a group known for their piety and their resistance to Hellenistic influence. But even though the connection isn't totally clear, we do have some tantalizing glimpses into their beliefs and practices from sources like Philo and Josephus, as well as from some passages in the Talmud.
And what do those sources tell us? What made the Essenes stand out?
Well, they seem to prioritize inner holiness and communal living over the more traditional temple sacrifices that were central to Jewish life at the time. Philo described them as intensely devoted to God, seeking purity and spiritual growth. They often lived in secluded communities, avoiding the perceived corruption of cities and emphasizing a simple, austere lifestyle.
So already we see a focus on inner transformation and a separation from mainstream society. It definitely points toward a more mystical orientation.
Exactly. However, the rabbinic records in the Talmud are a bit more vague when it comes to the Essenes, so the connection isn't totally clear-cut. Plus, there are some key differences that make it hard to draw a direct line to later mystical traditions.
Like what? What kind of differences?
Well, for example, the Essenes practice celibacy, which goes against the strong rabbinic emphasis on marriage and family life. So, while they represent an early form of intense Jewish piety with some mystical leanings, the relationship to later traditions is still debated.
Okay, so maybe more of an early inclination towards mysticism than a direct lineage. What about the Vatican? They were known as men of firm principles, and their mystical focus seems to have been centered on prayer.
Ah, the Vatican. What's interesting about them is how they show the potential for mystical intention within even seemingly ordinary religious practices. Our source highlights their meticulous attention to detail when reciting the Shema, a central Jewish prayer declaring God's unity. They would time their prayer to coincide precisely with the moment of sunrise.
Wow, that's some serious dedication.
It was more than just being punctual. They saw it as taking on what's called the yoke of the kingdom of heaven, at that very specific moment when the spiritual energy was thought to be most potent.
So for them, prayer wasn't just a daily routine. It was a way to tap into that deeper connection with the divine.
Exactly. They weren't just going through the motions. One rabbinic commentator described them as meek and performing commandments out of pure love. These qualities suggest a high level of spiritual awareness, a way of experiencing even the most mundane actions as infused with a deeper meaning.
It's fascinating how they infuse those everyday rituals with that mystical intention. Now, we also have the Zinum, often translated as the lowly chaste ones.
Hmm.
Their focus seems to have been on the power inherent in the Hebrew letters, something we touched on earlier.
Yes, the Zinuim really exemplify that ancient fascination with the letters of the divine name. The Talmud mentions a name of 42 letters that was believed to be incredibly powerful, but it was only entrusted to individuals who demonstrated exceptional moral and spiritual qualities: humility, meekness, self-control, and an absence of anger or vindictiveness.
A 42-letter name, that sounds more like a mystical formula than something you'd actually pronounce.
You're not wrong there. Even Maimonides, who's known for his rationalist approach to Judaism, didn't interpret it as a single word, but rather as a series of words that conveyed a deep understanding of God's essence. For him, truly grasping this name required profound metaphysical knowledge, not just the ability to say it correctly.
It's like there was this recognition that the power of the name wasn't just in its pronunciation, but in the deeper understanding it represented.
Precisely. The secrecy surrounding these names, like the substitution of a 12-lettered name in the temple during later periods, points to the esoteric nature of these teachings. These names become central to later Kabbalistic thought, with intricate connections to the Ten Sefirot and the idea of uncovering hidden aspects of the divine nature and the creative process.
It's amazing how these seemingly simple letters could hold so much meaning and power. Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about the Yezidim and Anshe Ma'aseh. These are often translated as saints and miracle workers. That sounds like a group with some serious spiritual mojo.
It does, doesn't it? Our source suggests these terms probably refer to the same group, or at least closely related sects, who were known for both their esoteric wisdom and their ability to perform extraordinary acts, often seen as miracles.
We hear stories about the Esidim hearing secrets from behind the curtain, like they had this direct line to divine revelation.
These accounts suggest they were so attuned to the spiritual realm that they could access knowledge hidden from ordinary perception. Then there are those stories of rabbis from that era who were said to possess semi-miraculous powers, like foretelling the future or even manipulating the physical world in ways that defied explanation. Their purity and devotion were thought to unlock something beyond the ordinary laws of nature.
It's like they were tapping into a hidden power source through their spiritual practice. Okay, now let's get into Merkabah mysticism. It's centered around Ezekiel's vision of the throne chariot, which is some seriously intense and honestly kind of bizarre imagery.
Ezekiel's vision is definitely a wild ride. But instead of trying to explain it rationally, Merkabah mystics embraced its mystery, seeing it as a symbolic opening to the profound interconnectedness between humanity and the divine.
So it wasn't about understanding it with their heads, but rather experiencing it on a deeper level. And the goal was to become a Merkabah rider, to ascend to those spiritual heights while still in their physical bodies.
Exactly. It was about using the chariot as a kind of spiritual vehicle to ascend into the heavenly realms, those unseen halls of divine mystery. While there might be some influences from other ancient mystical traditions, the core idea of a spiritual ascent is pretty universal. It's about that yearning to transcend our limitations and connect with something larger than ourselves.
It's that age-old quest for a direct experience of the divine. And there was actually an esoteric science of the Merkabah. It sounds like there was a structure to this practice, a system of knowledge to be passed down.
Yes, it seems there was a body of knowledge, likely involving a lot of angelology, that was transmitted to individuals who were deemed morally and spiritually prepared. The figure of Metatron, often associated with the biblical Enoch, plays a key role here. But it wasn't just about intellectual understanding. It was about cultivating the whole person, preparing them for this intense encounter with the divine.
And I guess the story of the young man who burst into flames while trying to explain the Ashmal, that mysterious term from Ezekiel's vision, highlights the potential dangers of approaching these mysteries without the proper preparation.
It definitely emphasizes that this wasn't some casual pursuit. You needed a certain level of maturity, both in terms of knowledge and character development. The Ashmal itself is open to interpretation, but it's often linked to fire and divine speech, representing that intense, transformative energy that a mystic might encounter.
Fire imagery seems to be a recurring theme in mystical traditions across the board. What do you think it symbolizes in this context?
Well, fire can symbolize a lot of things. Purification, transformation, the illumination that comes with spiritual insight. In the context of Jewish mysticism, it can also represent that intense connection with the divine, that feeling of being consumed by the divine presence. There's even this idea of the soul becoming red hot with God, a metaphor for that ultimate union.
So powerful. And then we have the story of Rabbi Ben Azavi being surrounded by fire while teaching Torah, but claiming he wasn't delving into the secrets of the Merkabah. That's interesting. It suggests different levels or maybe different kinds of mystical experiences.
Absolutely. Not all mystical experiences are the same. There might be different depths, different ways of encountering the divine. Rabbi Ben Azai's experience, while intense, might have been a different kind of encounter than those specifically associated with Merkabah mysticism. And the account of Jonathan, son of Uziel, whose intense study resulted in birds being incinerated by the fire emanating from him, that's another vivid image of those ecstatic states that a mystic might experience. His use of the term memra to describe divine activity also highlights that focus on the power of divine speech and expression in Jewish mysticism.
Wow, that's some serious spiritual heat. And what about the ministering angels? What role do they play in this mystical landscape?
Angels are more than just background figures in Jewish mysticism. They play a vital role, acting as intermediaries between the divine and the human realms. You have figures like Sandalphon, whose immense size is meant to convey his ability to bridge the gap between heaven and earth. And there's this idea that righteous individuals might even receive instruction from angels after death, and that particularly pious people can temporarily ascend to the unseen realms.
It's almost like this dynamic interaction between the human and angelic realms. And then there's that mysterious account of the four who entered paradise, Rabbi Akiba and three other. It sounds like a risky undertaking.
The Talmud's brief mention of this event has sparked a lot of mystical interpretation. But as our source suggests, it likely refers to those profound visionary experiences, those waking visits to the invisible world that are a common theme in mystical literature. The fact that only Rabbi Akiba is said to have emerged unscathed definitely highlights the potential risks and challenges of such profound spiritual exploration.
It's a reminder that this isn't just theoretical. These are deep, potentially life-altering experiences. And then we have the development of the Hekkelot literature, the halls or palaces of the heavenly realms. This emerged during the Gaonic period, several centuries later. What's the significance of this literature?
The Hekkelot literature represents a more structured form of Merkabah mysticism. The Eurodo Merkabah, literally those who descend to the chariot, engaged in specific practices, perhaps involving altered states of consciousness, to ascend through these heavenly halls and witness those divine mysteries. But this wasn't for the faint of heart. It required immense spiritual and ethical preparation.
So it was like a systematic approach to achieving those mystical experiences.
Exactly. While the ideal was to achieve this through purity and knowledge, our source also mentions that some people attempted these ascents through extreme practices, like fasting and intense prayer, seeking to transcend their ordinary senses and access those heavenly visions. And the Hekkelot literature had a significant impact on later Jewish mystical thought, including some aspects of modern asceticism.
Now, let's shift our focus to Jewish Hellenism. which flourished in Alexandria and brought together Greek philosophical ideas with Jewish tradition. How did this influence the development of Jewish mystical thought?
Jewish Hellenism is fascinating. It's this incredible blend of Greek philosophy and Jewish religious ideas. Philo Judaeus, a prominent philosopher of that era, is a key figure here. He synthesized ideas from Plato, Stoicism, and rabbinic thought, creating a unique system that incorporated mystical elements. His concept of the logoi, divine intermediaries that bridge the gap between the transcendent God and the material world, is particularly relevant to our discussion.
So how does Philo's idea of the logoi compare to rabbinic thought?
It's interesting. It runs parallel to rabbinic angelology, the study of angels, and the concept of the Shekinah, the divine presence, which we'll discuss later. But Philo's understanding of angels as incorporeal intelligences and immortal souls differs slightly from the more material or functional views sometimes found in rabbinic literature. His interpretation of Jacob's ladder as a symbolic abode for these souls also diverges from traditional Talmudic interpretations.
So Philo, influenced by Greek thought, offered a more philosophical understanding of those spiritual entities.
Exactly. He was trying to reconcile Greek philosophical ideas about the hierarchy of being with Jewish monotheism. And then there's the figure of Metatron again. Our source mentions intriguing connections to Zoroastrianism and Philo's logos in relation to Metatron. What's his role in all of this?
It seems like he pops up everywhere.
He does. Metatron is this crucial link between humanity and the divine. He's often identified with the biblical Enoch who, walked with God and then vanished. Metatron is often depicted as a heavenly scribe, a helper to God, even instructing children who die prematurely. While there are some interesting parallels to figures in other traditions like the Zoroastrian Mithra and Philo's logos, Metatron ultimately remains somewhat on the periphery of mainstream Jewish practice because of that unwavering emphasis on God's absolute unity.
It's that unwavering monotheism that keeps everything grounded, right? Even a figure as powerful as Metatron doesn't overshadow the central belief in one God.
Absolutely. Jewish monotheism is so foundational that even those exalted mystical figures remain within that framework. And another concept that emerges in Jewish Hellenistic mysticism is the personification of wisdom, chokhmah in Hebrew. It's like this divine attribute stepping out into the world and taking on an active role.
It's not just an abstract concept anymore. It becomes a force to be reckoned with.
Right. And this idea connects to similar concepts in other traditions, like the word, the logos in the Christian Gospels, and the various rabbinic terms like dibur and memra, all signifying divine utterance or active power. They represent that divine energy working in the world, connecting the transcendent God with creation and humanity.
So it's that active creative force that brings everything into being and sustains it. Now, let's move on to the mysticism of the Shekinah, the divine presence. This seems to emphasize a more immediate and intimate aspect of the divine being present with the people of Israel.
The Shekinah, which comes from the Hebrew word for to dwell or to reside, signifies that ongoing presence of the divine spirit among the people of Israel. It's not a separate entity from God, but rather an extension of God's being, that constant flow of divine life into human existence.
So it's like God isn't just out there somewhere, but is actively present within the community.
Exactly. And the intensity of that presence is often seen as contingent on the people's righteousness and their adherence to God's will.
So it's not a static presence. It can fluctuate depending on people's actions.
That's the idea. And some mystics even described experiencing physical sensations or intense emotions as signs of the Shekinah's presence. We see similar accounts in other mystical traditions where people talk about feeling a divine nearness or even seeing a brilliant light.
Those are powerful experiences. And it's believed that acting righteously, performing good deeds, can actually attract or even radiate this divine presence.
Absolutely. It's like goodness and piety create an environment where the Shekinah can flourish. And contact with those considered holy or saintly was thought to be a direct way to experience the Shekinah. You even see stories in the Midrash about the Shekinah ascending because of sin and then being drawn back to earth by the actions of righteous individuals.
So it's like humanity has this power to influence the divine presence in the world. That's pretty amazing. And the idea that even sharing a meal with a disciple of the wise is like experiencing the splendor of the Shekinah. That says a lot about the reverence for those who dedicate themselves to wisdom and Torah study.
It really highlights that belief that those deeply connected to the teachings of the Torah have a special relationship with the divine. Associating with them was seen as a way to draw closer to the Shekinah oneself, like soaking up that spiritual energy.
It's fascinating. Now, while the concept of the Shekinah might seem centered on the Jewish people, our source points out that the term Jew is sometimes used more broadly in a spiritual sense.
Right. While Jew obviously has a historical and ethnic meaning, the rabbis and mystical thinkers often used it in a more universal way, referring to anyone who rejects idolatry and embraces the ethical monotheism of the Torah. So it's more about a certain spiritual alignment, a commitment to those core principles, than just ethnicity.
So it's not exclusive to people of Jewish heritage. It's about a certain way of being in the world.
Exactly. The divine love and presence, symbolized by the Shekinah, are ultimately connected to goodness and a right relationship with God, regardless of your background. You see this reflected in the midrashic interpretation of King Solomon's chariot being paved with love, which the rabbis themselves identified with the Shekinah. It's this beautiful image of the divine love that permeates creation, available to all who align themselves with it.
It's a reminder that there's this universal aspect to these teachings, that they can speak to people from all walks of life. Now let's talk about a really intriguing and enigmatic text, the Book of Yetzirah, often translated as the Book of Creation. It seems like a foundational work for Jewish mystical philosophy, exploring the very building blocks of existence.
It's a cornerstone. This ancient text delves into a mystical cosmology based on the Hebrew alphabet, the sounds, shapes, numerical values, and arrangements of the 22 letters. But the dating and origins of the book are a bit of a mystery. Some scholars attribute it to figures like Abraham or Rabbi Akiba, while others place it much later.
So it's a text shrouded in mystery, which makes it even more fascinating.
Definitely. And what's fascinating is that it seems to draw upon older intellectual and spiritual traditions from the ancient Near East, including Egyptian, Babylonian, and possibly even Mandaean ideas. These influences are adapted and woven into a distinctly Jewish framework. You even see this idea reflected in the Talmud, where there's a mention of Bezalel, the artisan who built the tabernacle in the desert, knowing how to combine letters to create the heavens and the earth. It points to that ancient belief in the creative power of language, specifically the Hebrew alphabet.
It's amazing to think of letters as the building blocks of creation, imbued with that divine creative power.
Right. The 22 letters are seen as the instruments through which the divine intelligence structures and guides the cosmos. They're categorized into 3 mother letters, representing primary elements, 7 double letters, symbolizing fundamental dualities, and 12 simple letters, associated with the zodiac, the months of the year, and even the human body.
And the Book of Yetzirah is credited with introducing 2 really key concepts. Emanation, the idea that creation unfolds from the divine in stages, and the Ten Sefirot, those emanations that represent different aspects of divine action. And these ideas seem to appear even before similar concepts in other systems.
Yes, it suggests a shared intellectual and spiritual landscape with early Gnosticism and Neoplatonism, which were developing around the same time. It shows those cross-cultural currents of mystical thought that were circulating in the ancient world. And the Ten Sefirot in the Book of Yetzirah are primarily associated with the mysticism of numbers, representing divine action as abstract numerical forces. The book describes the first 4 Sefirot as spirit, air, water, and fire, with the remaining 6 representing the dimensions of space.
It's this incredibly complex system where letters, numbers, and divine action are all interconnected.
It is a complex system, and the syncretic nature of the Book of Yetzirah, drawing from different sources and traditions, does raise questions about the precise origins and consistency of all its parts. But it's a crucial early attempt to articulate a doctrine of emanation and understand reality through a distinctly Jewish mystical lens.
Okay, so finally, let's talk about the Zohar, often translated as splendor. It's considered the foundational text of Kabbalah, that main branch of Jewish mysticism that most people are familiar with. This is where Jewish mystical thought really blossoms into this elaborate and comprehensive system.
The Zohar, which is presented as a commentary on the Torah, emphasizes the idea that there are hidden esoteric truths beneath the surface level of the biblical text. It's like the literal narratives are just a garment concealing a deeper body of meaning and ultimately a soul of spiritual wisdom.
So it's not just about reading the Bible at face value, but about uncovering those hidden depths.
Absolutely. And the Zohar introduces this core Kabbalistic idea of an esoteric reality, where the physical world is a series of emanations originating from the divine essence, often called Ein Sof, meaning without end. Everything in existence ultimately comes from those eternal divine ideas. And the world below reflects the world above, allowing humans to connect with the unseen author of creation.
It's a beautiful and profound way of seeing the world, and it's interesting that alongside those lofty theological concepts, the Zohar also includes ideas from medieval astrology and physiognomy. It's like this blend of high philosophy and more earthly beliefs.
It reflects that medieval worldview where those different spheres of knowledge weren't as separated as they are today. And angelology also plays a significant role in the Zohar, building upon Talmudic ideas about the hierarchy of angels and the relationship between angels and humans. The Zohar even suggests that righteous individuals might be greater than angels in certain respects.
Really? How so?
Well, because humans, through their actions in the physical world, have this unique capacity for moral choice and spiritual growth. The Zohar outlines a system of 4 worlds, or levels of emanation: Absolute, Bariah, Yetzirah, and Essia. And humans, particularly the righteous ones, are seen as occupying a pivotal position within this cosmic hierarchy. Angels in this system often have specific missions or functions, representing different manifestations of the divine will.
It's a complex system. And how does the Zohar address the problem of evil? If everything ultimately comes from a perfect God, where does evil fit in?
The Zohar defines evil as kiliphoth, which means shells or coverings. These are seen as the gross, imperfect aspects of creation, the furthest removed from the pure divine essence of Ein Sof. Ultimately, they're considered less real than the true spiritual reality. Evil is seen as an absence of divine light, a state of separation, often symbolized by that formless chaos described in Genesis. And the concept of Tzimtzum, the divine contraction to make space for creation, is also relevant here, with evil existing at the farthest edge of that divine emanation.
So it's not like evil is an equal and opposite force to good. It's more like a shadow, a distortion of the true reality.
Exactly. It's a byproduct of creation, a necessary consequence of the infinite taking on finite form. And the term Ein Sof, no end, used to describe the boundless deity, echoes earlier philosophical ideas like Ibn Gabirol's concept of God as limitless.
It's that ultimate mystery, that unknowable essence that lies beyond all definition.
Right. Ein Sof represents that aspect of God that transcends human comprehension, devoid of any attributes we can grasp. It's the ultimate source of everything, but it can only be described in negative terms what it is not, rather than what it is. And the Zohar explains how this utterly transcendent God gives rise to a finite universe through the doctrine of the Ten Sefirot.
The Ten Sefirot, they're like the bridge between the infinite and the finite, the channels through which the unknowable God manifests in creation.
Exactly. They're not physical things, but rather represent the divine attributes and energies that flow into the cosmos. The first Sephirah, Keter, the crown, is the initial emanation from Ein Sof, the first glimmer of finite qualities emerging from the infinite. It's often described as a simple point or a primordial point, representing that first stirring of divine will or thought. It's also referred to as Resha Hivra, the white head, and Adik, the ancient of days.
And the second and third Sephirot, Okma, wisdom, and Bina, intelligence, represent the active and receptive principles, those fundamental polarities that give rise to everything else. They're often depicted as the father and mother principles, and the divine name itself is associated with the light emanating from these Sephirot.
Right. Those initial Sephiros are essential for the unfolding of creation. And the remaining 7 is Gedula, loving kindness, greatness, Bivurdinen, justice, strength, Tiferet, beauty, Nezah, victory, Yud, glory, Yesod, foundation, and Malkit, royalty, further articulate the vast array of divine attributes and how they manifest in the cosmos. They're often arranged in symbolic triads or groupings, with the final Sephirah, Malkut, representing the harmonious culmination of all the Sephirot, making the universe a reflection of the divine mind. And while those Sephirotic trinities might seem superficially similar to the Christian Trinity, they operate on very different theological levels.
It's incredible that some of those core Kabbalistic ideas even made their way into the traditional Jewish prayer book. There are Sabbath morning hymns that mention the Sephirot and reflect those mystical teachings on cosmology, angelology, and even astrology. It shows how deeply these ideas permeated Jewish religious life.
It shows that Kabbalah wasn't just this esoteric system confined to small circles. It had a broader influence on Jewish thought and practice.
Okay, so finally, let's talk about the soul as it's presented in the Zohar. It's such a central concept in Jewish mysticism, representing that deep connection between humanity and the divine.
The soul is fundamental to the Zoharic understanding of what it means to be human. Drawing on earlier Talmudic ideas, the Zohar emphasizes that the soul fills and sustains the body, and while invisible, it perceives the world. It's like how God is thought to fill and sustain the entire universe while remaining ultimately unseen. But the Zohar also incorporates ideas from Neoplatonism, viewing the soul as an emanation from a universal oversoul or divine mind.
So it's like each individual soul is a fragment of that larger divine consciousness.
Exactly. And the Zohar teaches that souls exist before entering physical bodies, and sometimes even resist descending into this material realm because of its potential for corruption. There are different levels or aspects of the soul, but ultimately they all return to their divine source upon death.
And the Zohar describes the soul as having a kind of trinity within itself, neshama, ruh, and nefesh.
Right. Nisham is the highest aspect, the rational soul that returns to God after death. Ruah is the moral and ethical spirit that finds no rest until Neshama completes its ascent. And Nefesh is that vital life force that's tied to the body and its needs.
And those different parts of the soul are even connected to specific Sefirot, linking the individual back to the cosmic order. It's an amazing system. And the Zohar also teaches the concept of reincarnation, Gilgul, seeing it as a process of the soul's evolution and as a way to understand divine justice.
Exactly. The idea is that the soul might need multiple lifetimes to achieve purification and reach its full potential. And the Zohar also introduces the idea of a pre-existing spiritual form of the body that unites with the soul at marriage, influencing not just physical traits, but also personality and spiritual inclinations.
So fascinating. And it seems like love plays a huge role in the Zohar's understanding of the soul.
Love is paramount. It's considered the soul's most visible quality and the driving force for achieving union with God. Serving God out of love, not just obligation or fear, is seen as the path to return to one's divine origin.
It's about that deep heart connection, that yearning to be one with the divine.
Exactly. And that famous verse, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one," is even interpreted in the Zohar as hinting at this ultimate merging of the soul back into divine unity. It draws upon those beautiful midrashic interpretations of the Song of Songs, which also emphasize the power of love in the spiritual journey.
And when the soul completes its earthly cycle, the Zohar describes it returning to a treasury of life or a temple of love, contemplating the divine presence through a shining mirror.
Yes, the Zohar offers a very hopeful view of the afterlife, emphasizing the soul's potential for purification, growth, and ultimately reunion with its source. Even the idea of death by a kiss speaks to that ultimate union with the divine.
It's a beautiful image, and the Zohar's description of humanity originally being clothed in divine light in the Garden of Eden, which was then replaced by coats of skin after the fall, really speaks to that sense of loss and that yearning to return to a state of spiritual wholeness.
It highlights that deep desire for connection that lies at the heart of Jewish mysticism. It's about recognizing that spark of the divine within ourselves and seeking to rekindle that connection.
Well, this deep dive has only scratched the surface of this incredibly rich and complex world of Jewish mysticism. From those early longings for connection with the divine to the elaborate systems developed in Kabbalah to understand creation and the soul, we've gotten a glimpse into this tradition that's filled with poetry, philosophy, and this enduring search for meaning.
It's a tradition that offers so much to explore and contemplate.
It really does. And as we wrap up, I'm left thinking about those big questions that Jewish mysticism grapples with. How do we reconcile our limited intellect with those deep longings of the heart? What does it mean for God to be both transcendent, beyond our grasp, and immanent, present within us and within the world? And how do these ancient teachings speak to our own modern search for understanding and connection? I hope this deep dive has sparked your own curiosity and given you some new perspectives to consider. Thanks for joining us.